You know that saying about how you don't know what you have until it's gone? I used to roll my eyes at that. Now I live it every single day. I'm Aria Sanders, 43 years old, and 2 years ago I made what I thought was the most courageous decision of my life. Turns out it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. And I've done some pretty stupid things. I'm sitting here in my studio apartment, and I use the term apartment generously since it's basically a glorified closet with a kitchenette, wondering how I went from a comfortable suburban life to eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week. My kids barely return my calls. My ex-husband won't even acknowledge I exist. And I'm working at a dental office making less money than I made 15 years ago. But let me start at the beginning, because this mess didn't happen overnight. Carter and I met when we were both 25, working at the same insurance company. He was in claims processing, methodical and steady, the kind of guy who organized his sock drawer and never forgot to change the oil in his car. I was in customer service, which should have been my first clue about my personality. I liked fixing other people's problems, making everyone else happy, sometimes at my own expense. We dated for 3 years before getting married in 1999. Looking back, it was a perfectly pleasant courtship. Carter brought me flowers every Friday. We went to the same Italian restaurant every Saturday night. And he proposed exactly where I expected him to, at the botanical gardens during the spring flower show. Safe, predictable, comfortable. The first decade was actually good. We bought a house in Westfield, a 3-bedroom colonial with a picket fence that Carter painted white every other summer like clockwork. We had 2 kids, Sophie in 2003 and Jake in 2005. Carter coached Jake's Little League team and never missed one of Sophie's dance recitals. He handled all our finances, fixed everything that broke around the house, and took us on vacation to the same lake house in New Hampshire every August. But somewhere around year 15, I started feeling restless. Not unhappy exactly, just invisible. Carter would come home, eat the dinner I'd made, help the kids with homework, watch whatever was on the History Channel, and fall asleep on the couch by 9:30. Weekends were for yard work and grocery shopping and catching up on household projects. We'd lost the thread of conversation somewhere along the way. When we did talk, it was about schedules and bills and whose turn it was to drive carpool. I'd watch other couples at parties, the ones who still held hands or laughed at each other's jokes, and wonder when Carter and I had stopped doing those things. When had we become roommates instead of lovers? I couldn't even remember the last time we'd had sex that wasn't perfunctory, scheduled for Saturday nights after the kids were asleep, like another item on our weekly to-do list. Don't get me wrong, Carter wasn't a bad husband. He never raised his voice, never forgot my birthday, never made me worry about money, but he also never surprised me, never asked what I was thinking about, never seemed to really see me anymore. I felt like a supporting character in my own life, there to make sure everyone else's needs were met while my own slowly withered away. That's when Blake Hoffman started working at the dental office where I'd taken a part-time job once the kids were older. Blake was everything Carter wasn't. Spontaneous, charming, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were the most interesting person there. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep who came by our office twice a month, and from the first day he walked in, something shifted. Blake paid attention, real attention. He remembered details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier. He'd bring me coffee from this fancy place downtown, because I'd mentioned once that I preferred dark roast. He'd text me articles he thought I'd find interesting or funny memes that made me laugh out loud at my desk. For the first time in years, someone was actively trying to make me happy, and I was starved for that kind of attention. At first, I told myself we were just friends. Blake was recently divorced, understanding about the complexities of married life, a good listener who didn't judge when I complained about feeling taken for granted at home. But the energy between us was electric. He'd brush my hand when passing me papers, and I'd feel it all the way up my arm. He'd stand a little too close when showing me something on his phone, and I'd catch myself holding my breath. I started looking forward to his visits with an intensity that should have alarmed me. I'd plan my outfits around his schedule, make sure I looked my best on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I bought new perfume, started wearing makeup to work again, even got highlights for the first time in 5 years. When Carter noticed, and it took him 3 weeks, he just asked if I was having some kind of midlife crisis and went back to reading his paper. Blake noticed everything: the new earrings, the way I'd styled my hair differently, when I seemed tired or stressed. He made me feel seen in a way I'd forgotten was possible. We started texting throughout the day, innocent at first, then increasingly intimate. He'd tell me I was beautiful, that I deserved to be appreciated, that any man would be lucky to have me. I ate it up like a woman dying of thirst. The affair started 6 months after we met. Blake had been persistent about taking me to lunch, just as friends, he said, but we both knew it was more than that. I kept saying no, but one particularly difficult day when Carter had forgotten our anniversary, again, and the kids were fighting, and I felt completely overwhelmed and unappreciated. Blake texted asking if I needed a friend. I said yes. We went to a restaurant an hour away where no one would know us. Blake listened while I poured out years of accumulated loneliness and frustration. He held my hand across the table and told me I deserved better, that I was an amazing woman who'd been undervalued for too long. When he kissed me in the parking lot afterward, I didn't pull away. I kissed him back like my life depended on it. That first kiss unleashed something I'd kept buried for years. Suddenly I felt alive again, desirable, interesting. Blake couldn't get enough of me, and I couldn't get enough of how he made me feel. We started meeting for lunch dates that stretched into the afternoon. I'd lie to Carter about working late or having errands to run. The deception came surprisingly easily. Blake made me feel like the woman I used to be, before I became just Carter's wife and the kids' mom. With him, I was Aria again. Funny, sexy, worth pursuing. He'd surprise me with small gifts, write me notes that made my heart race, plan romantic getaways to hotels where we'd spend entire afternoons in bed talking and laughing and making love like teenagers. I started comparing everything Carter did to Blake. Carter's steady reliability seemed boring next to Blake's passionate unpredictability. Carter's practical approach to everything felt stifling. Compared to Blake's romantic spontaneity, I convinced myself that what Blake and I had was real love. The kind of soul-deep connection I'd read about but never experienced. What Carter and I had felt like settling, like accepting less than I deserved. After 8 months of living a double life, I couldn't take the compartmentalization anymore. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped between the life I had and the life I wanted. Blake had started talking about us having a future together, about how perfect we were for each other, how we deserved to be happy, so I made the decision that would destroy everything I'd built. I told Carter I wanted a divorce. The conversation happened on a Tuesday night in November after the kids had gone to bed. Carter was doing a crossword puzzle at the kitchen table, glasses perched on his nose, completely absorbed in finding a 7-letter word for diminished. I sat down across from him and said we needed to talk. He looked up with mild concern, probably expecting me to tell him about a problem with one of the kids or an issue with the house. Instead, I told him I wasn't happy, hadn't been happy for a long time, and I thought we should separate. The pen fell out of his hand. He just stared at me for what felt like forever, then asked if there was someone else. I could have lied, should have lied, but I was so tired of deception that I told him yes. Carter's face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Shock, hurt, anger, disgust. He asked who it was, how long it had been going on, where I'd been all those times I said I was working late. I answered honestly, thinking somehow that would make it better. It didn't. It made everything infinitely worse. The man who'd never raised his voice in 17 years of marriage started yelling. He called me selfish, reckless, a liar, and a cheater. He said I'd destroyed our family for what, some midlife fantasy? He asked what I thought this would do to Sophie and Jake, whether I'd considered anyone besides myself in this decision. The worst part was that he was right about everything, but I was too intoxicated by the promise of my new life with Blake to admit it. Carter moved into the guest room that night, and barely spoke to me for the next 3 weeks. When he did talk, it was only about logistics, who would tell the kids, how we'd divide assets, when I'd be moving out. He was coldly practical about the whole thing, which somehow made it worse than if he'd kept yelling. Telling the kids was horrific. Sophie was 16, old enough to understand what was really happening. She looked at me like I was a stranger, asked how I could do this to Dad, to them, to our family. Jake was only 14 and kept asking if it was his fault, if there was something he could do to fix it. I tried to explain that sometimes people grow apart, that I'd always loved them, that this wasn't about them. But how do you explain betrayal to children without using the word? Sophie stopped talking to me almost immediately. She'd answer direct questions with yes or no, but the easy relationship we'd had, shopping together, watching movies, talking about her friends in school, disappeared overnight. Jake tried to stay neutral at first, but I could tell he was angry and confused. He started spending more time at his friends' houses, avoiding being alone with me. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Carter wanted everything documented. Every lie I'd told. Every afternoon I'd spent with Blake instead of where I'd claimed to be. His lawyer painted me as an unfit mother, a woman who'd abandoned her family responsibilities for an affair. My lawyer kept trying to negotiate a better settlement, but I just wanted it over. I thought Blake and I would build something new together, so what did it matter if Carter kept the house and most of our savings? Love would be enough. I moved in with Blake 3 months before the divorce was finalized. He had a condo downtown, modern and sleek. Nothing like the lived-in comfort of the house I'd shared with Carter and the kids. It felt like playing house, like we were acting out some fantasy of what our life together would be like. For a while, it was intoxicating. Blake and I had 18 months together before everything fell apart. The first year was everything I dreamed of. Romantic dinners, weekend getaways, passionate conversations that lasted until dawn. Blake made me feel cherished in a way I'd forgotten was possible. We talked about traveling together, maybe moving somewhere warmer, starting fresh where nobody knew our history. But gradually, cracks started showing. Blake's attention, which had felt so focused and intense when we were sneaking around, became suffocating when we were living together. He wanted to know where I was every minute, got jealous when I talked to male coworkers, accused me of flirting with the grocery store clerk. The spontaneity I'd found so attractive became unreliability. He'd make plans and cancel them last minute, promise things he didn't follow through on, disappear for hours without explanation. Money became a constant source of tension. Blake's sales job was commission-based, which meant some months were great and others were terrible. But he spent like every month was great, booking expensive restaurants and buying gadgets we didn't need. When I suggested we budget more carefully, he'd get defensive, say I was trying to control him like his ex-wife had. I started covering more of our expenses, dipping into the modest settlement I'd gotten from the divorce. The worst part was how he talked about Carter and the kids. At first, Blake had been sympathetic about the difficult situation, understanding about my guilt and grief over losing my family. But as time went on, he became dismissive, even cruel. He'd say Carter was a loser who'd never deserved me, that the kids would get over it once they realized how much happier I was. When I'd cry after particularly painful phone calls with Sophie or Jake, Blake would roll his eyes and tell me I needed to stop living in the past. I started to see Blake clearly for the first time, and what I saw scared me. The charming attention had been a performance, designed to win me away from my marriage. The real Blake was insecure, manipulative, unable to maintain the intensity that had drawn me to him in the first place. But I'd given up everything for this relationship. Admitting it was a mistake felt impossible. The final blow came when I discovered Blake had been seeing other women. Not just one, several. Women he'd met through work, women he'd connected with on dating apps he'd never deleted from his phone. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He said our relationship had become too serious too fast, that he'd never promised to be monogamous, that I'd assumed too much. I moved out that day, but I had nowhere to go. Carter had made it clear I wasn't welcome back home. The kids were living their lives around the hole I'd left in the family. Sophie was about to graduate high school and had already told me not to come to the ceremony. Jake was barely speaking to me. I'd burned every bridge for a man who'd never intended to build a future with me. I found this studio apartment through a classified ad. It's in a part of town I'd never lived in before, surrounded by people starting over after their own disasters. Recent divorces, job losses, addiction recoveries. We nod at each other in the hallway but don't make eye contact too long. We all know we're here because we messed up somehow. The job at the dental office became my lifeline. Dr. Reeves had been understanding about my situation, probably because she'd gone through her own messy divorce years earlier. But the salary that had been supplemental income when I was married isn't enough to live on alone. I've had to learn about food stamps and government assistance, things I never imagined I'd need. The hardest part isn't the financial struggle or the loneliness, though both are crushing. It's the way my children look at me now. Sophie graduated valedictorian and didn't tell me until after the ceremony. I found out through a mutual friend's Facebook post. Jake made the varsity soccer team his junior year, and I learned about it from his coach, who didn't realize Carter and I were divorced. I try to stay connected, sending texts that go unanswered, leaving voicemails that aren't returned. Once a month, Sophie will respond with basic information. She's fine, school is good, she's busy. Jake is slightly more communicative, but our conversations feel stilted, like he's talking to a distant relative rather than his mother. The worst part is seeing how they've bonded more closely with Carter in my absence. He's become both mother and father to them, handling everything from college applications to driving lessons to emotional support. From the outside, they look like a strong, resilient family unit. I'm the piece that was cut away, the part that proved to be unnecessary. Carter started dating someone about 6 months after our divorce was finalized. Her name is Linda, and she's everything I'm not. Calm, stable, content with quiet evenings and predictable routines. The kids like her. Sophie has told me during one of our rare conversations that Linda makes Dad happy in a way he hadn't been in years. The implication was clear. In a way, I hadn't made him happy. I've had a lot of time to think about what went wrong, sitting alone in this small space with nothing but my regrets for company. I used to blame Carter for taking me for granted, for becoming complacent, for not fighting harder to keep me interested. I blamed Blake for being a liar and a manipulator. I blamed the kids for not understanding that I needed to be happy too. But the truth is simpler and more painful. I destroyed my own life because I confused excitement with love, attention with affection, passion with commitment. I mistook the familiar comfort of a long marriage for emptiness, when really it was the deepest kind of contentment. I had everything I needed and threw it away because I wanted something that sparkled more brightly, not realizing that fool's gold only glitters until you try to spend it. Carter wasn't perfect, but he was faithful, responsible, present. He loved me in quiet, consistent ways that I'd stopped noticing, because they'd become as natural as breathing. He would have worked on our marriage if I'd asked him to. He would have gone to counseling, planned more date nights, been more attentive if I'd told him what I needed instead of looking for it elsewhere. The kids weren't keeping me from being happy. They were part of what should have made me happy. Watching them grow, being there for their milestones, having a front row seat to their becoming the people they were meant to be. I gave that up for stolen afternoons with a man who saw me as a conquest rather than a partner. I've been seeing a therapist for the past 6 months, paid for by a sliding scale community mental health program. Dr. Martinez doesn't judge me for what I did, but she doesn't let me off the hook either. She's helping me understand how I got to such a desperate place, how I convinced myself that betraying my family was justified. We talk a lot about accountability versus self-forgiveness, about how to live with consequences without drowning in shame. Some days are better than others. Some days I can see this experience as a hard lesson that might eventually make me a better person. Other days I feel like I'm serving a life sentence for 18 months of terrible decisions. I've started volunteering at a literacy program for adults, teaching people to read who never learned as children. It helps to focus on someone else's struggles, to be useful in a small way. My students don't know about my past, only that I'm patient and encouraging. For 2 hours twice a week, I get to be the person I want to be, rather than the person I've become. Last month, I got a text from Jake. He's 18 now, about to graduate high school. The text was short. "Can we talk?" We met for coffee at a place near his school, the first time I'd seen him in person in over a year. He's grown taller, his voice deeper, his face more angular. He looks like Carter did at that age. Jake told me he's been accepted to 3 colleges and wanted me to know, even though he wasn't sure how to feel about it. He said he misses me sometimes, but doesn't know how to get past what I did to their family. He asked if I'm happy now, if it was worth it. I told him the truth, that I'm not happy, that it wasn't worth it, that I think about him and Sophie every day. We talked for an hour, mostly about his plans for college and his girlfriend and his job at the hardware store. Normal things, mother and son things that felt both precious and painful. When we said goodbye, he hugged me, briefly but genuinely. It was the first physical affection I'd received from either of my children in 2 years. Sophie is still completely closed off to me. She's at college now, studying engineering like she always planned. I know this because Jake tells me, not because she shares it herself. I send her cards on her birthday and holidays, never knowing if she opens them. I put money in a savings account for her, thinking maybe someday she'll need it, and it can be one small way of showing I still care. I'm not sure what the future holds. Some days I think about moving away, starting completely fresh somewhere nobody knows my story. Other days I think I need to stay here, close enough to be available if my children ever want to rebuild our relationship, even if that takes years or decades. I've learned to live with loneliness in a way I never thought I'd have to. I've learned to budget for groceries and fix my own leaky faucet and fall asleep to the sound of my upstairs neighbor's television instead of someone breathing beside me. I've learned that rock bottom has a trap door, that just when you think you can't lose anything else, life finds something else to take away. But I've also learned that you can survive the complete destruction of everything you thought defined you. That shame, while crushing, isn't actually fatal. That even the worst mistakes don't necessarily make you irredeemable, just human in the most painful way possible. I think about Carter sometimes, wonder if he's happy with Linda, if they laugh together the way we used to in the early years. I hope they do. I hope he's learned from my failures how to nurture what he has, instead of taking it for granted. I hope Linda appreciates his steady kindness, his reliability, his quiet ways of showing love. There's a letter I've written to Carter but will never send. In it, I apologize, not just for the affair, but for all the ways I failed our marriage long before Blake came along. For becoming resentful instead of communicative. For looking outside our relationship instead of working to improve what we had. For convincing myself that passion was more important than partnership. I tell him in this letter that he was a good husband, that our life together was a good life, that I understand now what I threw away. I thank him for being a wonderful father to our children, for holding our family together when I tore it apart, for showing them what stability and commitment look like even when I couldn't. I end the letter by telling him I hope he finds everything with Linda that I was too blind to see we already had, that I hope she loves him the way he deserves to be loved, appreciates him the way I should have appreciated him, chooses him every day the way he chose me for 17 years until I made that impossible. But I'll never send this letter because I have no right to ask for his attention or his forgiveness. The best thing I can do for Carter is stay out of his life and let him be happy without the reminder of what I cost him. If I could go back and whisper one thing to the woman I was 2 years ago, standing in that kitchen, about to destroy everything she'd built, I'd tell her this. The life you have isn't perfect, but it's real. The man sitting across from you isn't exciting, but he's faithful. The children upstairs aren't keeping you from happiness. They are your happiness if you'd only let yourself see it. I'd tell her that the feeling of being invisible in her own life isn't because her life is wrong. It's because she's stopped participating in it. That the solution isn't to burn everything down and start over. It's to start appreciating what she has while working to make it better. I'd tell her that Blake's attention feels so intense because it's new, but newness fades. That Carter's love feels ordinary because it's constant. But constancy is what allows a relationship to deepen rather than just burn bright and die out. Most of all, I tell her that there are no do-overs in life, only consequences. That the choice she's about to make will follow her forever, will change her children's lives forever, will end something that took decades to build in service of something that will barely last 2 years. But I can't go back. And that woman wouldn't have listened anyway. She was convinced she knew what she was doing, that she deserved more, that she was brave enough to reach for what she wanted regardless of the cost. She had no idea how much she was about to pay, or that the price would include everything that actually mattered. So here I am, 43 years old, starting over with nothing but the knowledge of how badly I messed up. Some people might call that wisdom, but wisdom that comes at the cost of everything you love feels more like punishment than enlightenment. Maybe someday my children will forgive me. Maybe someday I'll forgive myself. Maybe someday I'll build something good from the ruins of what I destroyed. But for now, all I can do is wake up each morning in my small apartment, go to my small job, and try to be a little bit better today than I was yesterday. That's not much of a legacy for 43 years of living, but it's all I have left to work with. And maybe if I'm very lucky and very patient, it will be enough to start rebuilding something worth having, even if it's nothing like what I lost.